Good evening and welcome to the show. Coming up on Credlin tonight, Coalition MPs are doing their best to dampen any leadership speculation as the Prime Minister fails his own test of 30 straight Newspoll losses. But first, it was always going to end like this. As the saying goes, as you sow, so shall you reap. Or to anyone else less biblical, karma is a bitch. 2.5 years ago, when Malcolm Turnbull said this,
"The one thing that is clear about our current situation is the trajectory. We have lost 30 Newspolls in a row. It is clear that the people have made up their mind about Mr Abbott's leadership."
When he said that, he never thought for a moment it would ever apply to him. Such is his self-belief, indeed arrogance. He thought that once he was installed as Prime Minister by the party room, rather than a vote by the people, there would be such overwhelming support for his ascension that endorsement at the ballot box would be a mere formality. That's not how it's turned out. Indeed, the past 2.5 years have been a bitter dose of reality for a man who thought it was his destiny to seize the Prime Ministership. Anyone who thinks Malcolm Turnbull entered Parliament to be someone else's minister needs their head read. As a backbencher, he tried to shame then Treasurer Peter Costello by delivering his own tax plan to Parliament despite being only months in the place. When he survived the 2007 Rudd landslide, he rang John Howard to blow his own trumpet, just as John Howard was driving across the Harbour Bridge to give his concession speech. He didn't commiserate with Howard, who was about to lose his own seat of Bennelong. Instead, he boasted that he'd increased his majority in Wentworth. When he wasn't elected opposition leader, losing out to Brendan Nelson, Turnbull stormed into Nelson's office, jabbing him physically in the chest. He insisted that Nelson wasn't up to it and demanded that Nelson go straight back into the party room, resign and give the job to him. You couldn't make this up. When leader, Malcolm Turnbull blew up over Godwin Gretsch and then almost blew up the Liberal Party trying to ram through Rudd's ETS, telling the party room one thing and Labor another. I know because I was in the room during the negotiations with Labor. In opposition, Tony Abbott put Malcolm Turnbull in his shadow cabinet because he felt to leave a former leader on the backbench showed a lack of respect to the party. Of course, that meant a lot of detail from shadow cabinet made its way into the media. But of course, that could have come from anyone. A couple of years on from the coup, I'm now aware of the full extent of preparations to oust Tony Abbott. They started in opposition even before the landslide win in 2013, but picked up momentum as Abbott did things that made him unpopular, such as banning first-class travel for MPs, stopping them employing their family members, asking questions when they wanted to employ kids straight out of uni with no life experience on a $200,000 salary. Abbott also made enemies when he took on the Liberal Party's factions and some of the all-powerful lobbyists by banning them from the federal executive. The Sunday night before Turnbull's leadership challenge, Julie Bishop's Chief of Staff attended the final meeting of the coup plotters at Peter Hendy's house in Queanbeyan. He was there at her behest, otherwise it would have been a sacking offence, and he's still in her employ as Chief of Staff today. On the day of the challenge, Julie Bishop pledged her loyalty to Abbott, and later that night she stood side by side with Malcolm Turnbull, her third opposition leader and her second PM. You beat the judge. We then had the fiasco of the last federal election where the PM knocked off at lunchtime, had to write his own cheque to buy back his own job, and in some seats the party had to resort to paying people to hand out because party volunteers went on strike. 14 seats lost, and only by 1 seat was the country spared Bill Shorten moving into the lodge the next day. Of course, Turnbull couldn't believe it, and as we saw in his speech on election night, he was bitter and angry too. Not a mention of colleagues that had lost their seat, no thanks to valiant candidates or tired volunteers. It was an episode of self-pity that was ultimately all about Malcolm, not coalition supporters and certainly not the Australian people. Like Rudd before him, when this job ends, Turnbull will be insulated by his financial good fortune and spend much of his time overseas. By any measure, a Turnbull win at the next election is almost inconceivable. But to him, you see, he's already won. He's got the job he's coveted all his life. The loser in all of this has been the Liberal Party and its supporters. Not to forget all of those voters who believe they get to choose their leader. But most of all, it's been the ordinary Australian who just wants government to focus on them.